have you done?
Oh gosh, let me think. Two that I know of in the long easy. The one up at San Jose was nighttime, and I had a headwind the whole way there. It was the biggest headwind I've ever had. And then when I got there, I realized that I had to put my gear down. I put it down and landed without a gear. And then on the ground, I realized I hadn't had it up at all the whole flight. So I called my electronics guy. I said, "Ian, fix my gear warning indicator." So he did. Finally.
You mean you cranked your gear up and landed?
Yeah.
Damage done to the nose. It needs to be looked at. There's some more damage that this gear up received. A little bit more down there. We're not sure how much damage, but we'll get into it here. I decided to trailer the aircraft home to determine exactly how much damage was done to the nose.
We made it. It was successful.
I put the gear partly down, and then I realized I was going 180 miles an hour, so I said, oh, I better not put it down. So I forgot the rest of it. And I landed, and it went collapsed immediately from 1/3 down to zero. And I left my headset on, and I climbed out of the plane with my headset on, and I could talk to tower. And while I was standing there, pulled the thing up. I was strong that day. I got the gear down, and I was back in the plane before they even noticed. Just keep talking to them. Yes, I just used my secondary landing system. Yeah. And it works fine.
Now that we've got the airplane in a position where we can really see what kind of damage was done to this gear up, we're looking at the underside now where the nose has scraped the runway. And you can see there's substantial damage under there. One of my major concerns was the bulkhead attaches to the canard. So I had never seen an airplane that did a nose up that had the exterior damage that this one has got. Had quite a bit of delamination, primarily in this area here. This whole section has come loose. Although the bulkhead, which attaches to the canard, seems to be intact fairly nicely. My major concern with this would be any of the weak spots. This crack here, this is all pretty loose here, and in here also it's pretty loose.
It all has to come off.
Is that what you telling?
You know, because you can't really repair this, you know, it's just easier to build it, you know.
Cosmetically, I could clean it up. You never know, but it would never be as strong.
No.
Make sure your warning system is working.
What
But it
gear
wasn't
up?
my airplane.
Greg, you want to tell us about your gear up?
What gear up?
What gear up?
At me, and I thought the best thing to do was just plain stop. And I did. It happened quickly, like half a second.
What led up to that?
Oh, well, it was the other guy's fault.
We have removed the nose of this aircraft in preparation for a new one. We've inspected the bulkhead, and it appears to be intact, strong, and solid. The nose is over here. This is the old urethane foam, which is real soft. And one thing that happens is when it breaks, like it has in this area, you see it's cracked here. It tends to rub back and forth over a period of time, just turns to powder, dust inside the airplane. That hasn't happened here, but if he would have continued to fly it in this condition, that would have occurred. And we're starting in the process of reassembling, putting things back together. I've just cleaned up the spring and part of the retract mechanism. I've pulled out all the parts on the gear, cleaned them up, reinstalled them. Now I've jigged it back into position, in the up position, because the tricky part is the alignment here. And this is a brand new gear, and we did have some alignment issues. Here's the original nose gear. You can see where it ground quite a bit of material off of that. I've used some of the same hardware on here in replacing the one that's on there now. I've used some stir sticks to keep it centered in there. This is extremely tight fit into this area here where the gear retracts into. And a little bit more prep to do on this airplane, and then I'll start foaming out the nose. Here I'm starting to put the foam back on the airplane. You've noticed that I've jigged the canard back in position. I've also prepped the edge for bonding of the fiberglass once I get the rest of the foam on, blocked out, and set in place. You can see I've attached the spring now since it's been cleaned up, and it seems to work just fine. I use pour-in-place polyurethane rigid 2-pound foam to bond all the foam to itself and to the fiberglass. The car is very similar to the 2-pound styrofoam that I'm using.
I got to tell you about 3 gear up landings that I've had in my Easy over 1,700 hours now of flying it. The first one, I'd only been flying it for about 200 or 300 hours, I think, and I was on a night flight down to Torrance and came to wind the gear down, and the handle just sort of kept rotating with nothing happening at all. And no matter what I try and do with it, it just wouldn't come down. So I thought, I had a passenger in the back and I got a toolbox in the back, or at least I did at that time. So I got him to get a pair of pliers out for me and hand them over to me, and I found that I was able to reach the drive shaft down between my legs, and I managed to wind the gear down with a pair of pliers. And I thought I got it all the way down, but evidently I didn't, because when I landed on the right runway at Torrance, the nose gear just collapsed because it wasn't wound down fully. And I found out later that the reason that it wouldn't wind down was one of the rivets that was used to join one of the connections on the drive shaft just simply hadn't been peened over. And I've been flying it for over 300 hours like that with the rivet just pushed in there. It really surprised me, because usually I'm very fastidious about stuff like that, but the rivet just dropped out. Okay, number 2 was a particularly embarrassing one, which was just basically forgetting to put the gear down. The only thing I will say, though, was I had a woman in the back who was just so excited about flying the Easy, and she was just jabbering the whole time, all the way entering downwind, all the way downwind, all the way on base. She was jabber, jabber, jabber. I just forgot about it. But the funny thing about it was that somebody had noticed, this was at Torrance again, somebody had noticed that I was coming in with my gear up, and they told the guys on the ground frequency, or somebody reported in on the ground frequency, and they didn't tell the tower, and apparently there was enough time for the tower to tell me that my gear wasn't down. But anyway, I landed and it ground a groove on the runway there, and then when I came to pick it up, I don't know whether this is common, but I found I couldn't lift the thing because it had welded itself to the asphalt. And when I did finally manage to lift it up by really hauling on the canard, it pulled up about a piece of asphalt about this big stuck to the nose. But the funny part about that was the next day I was flying, and as I came in, I got a call on the ground frequency, and Torrance Tower said, would you mind stopping by the tower to have a chat with us for a minute? I thought, oh God, they're going to give me a bunch of rubbish over landing with my nose gear up. And anyway, I went up to the tower and talked to the tower foreman, or the town manager, he was talking to somebody else when I went in there, and he sort of hushed him out. I was feeling very nervous. Anyway, we got the other guy out that was in his office, and he came over to me and said, you know, I owe you an apology. He said, we really screwed up yesterday. So I thought, so I said to him, well, how could that be? So he said, well, you know, we got a report on the ground frequency that your gear was up, and we were too slow in telling you to put your nose gear down. So we felt kind of responsible for you doing that. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was nothing to do with them. The responsibility was entirely mine. But that's the way they looked at it. It didn't give me any trouble at all.
How much damage to the airplanes?
Was none at all. One of the things I did with mine was I got a big steel plate underneath. Somebody had warned me about gear up landings in an easy, and so I put a big steel plate in, and I think it wore it in half. In fact, I just put a bit of fiberglass over it, and it was fine after that. Stick a bit of paint on it. Mind you, that woman was talking pretty loud too, so maybe the squawking that was coming from her the whole time was just that little bit louder than the warning system. Anyway, the third one, I was flying up to Santa Rosa, and when I got there, they were working on re-asphalting all of the taxiways, and I ended up having a taxi about 2 miles before I got to the tie down. I didn't think of anything about it. Anyway, I took off from there, came home, and I was coming into Santa Ynez here, went to wind the gear down, and it just simply wouldn't go down. It would wind down about 3 turns on the handle, and it just wouldn't go any further. And I tried quite a few times. I tried shaking the airplane around, pulling G's, negative and positive, and the thing still wouldn't go down. So I just resigned myself to the fact that I was just going to have to land nose gear up, which didn't really worry me that much because I had done it so many times. But anyway, when I got that down, I noticed that what had happened was I have a panel that fills in the gap that is opened up when the nose gear is up in the up position. There's a gap just on the front edge or leading edge of the nose gear strut, and I have a little flap that fills that gap in, and it slides down over the gear as it goes down. And what had happened, I guess at Santa Rosa, one of the screws had come out just a little bit, that is part of the main gear, and this flap just caught up on it. It was only sticking up about less than a 1/16 of an inch, but it was enough to stop the gear being wound down. I didn't want to use too much force on it, or break the gears or something like that. See, if you find yourself in a situation where you want to stop quick, or you have to land in a very short space because of whatever reason, don't hesitate to think in terms of landing with your gear up, because it will stop you quicker. And the damage it does is so minor, it's not even worth really worrying about, when there are other factors that might be a lot more dangerous. So, if you find, like if your brakes fail, just pop the gear and just let it drop on its nose. It'll stop you pretty quick.
See, I have continued to block the foam out, and I've started at a point where I can start carving it, and I usually start from the center. Always go from the highest point and work down. So I get a line that looks somewhat the shape that I want, and then I work out from there. Tools at this point that I'm using are basic wood saw to cut the foam, a couple of Sureform rasps. I like the curved ones. So we'll just continue. This is probably the most labor-intensive part of this project, but also the most rewarding when you get it all carved and shaped the way you like it.
Now?
Yeah.
That magic, it's never going to happen to me. Gear up, landing. I was going to make sure it wasn't, so I installed a horn. Worked. Things were different this day. Departing at a Camarillo and a honking east wind and left downwind departure towards Santa Ynez. Running late for work. Needed to get up here. Looked out at my wing, and I hadn't tightened my fuel cap, so it's just vibrating there. And so I needed to land. And I was cleared real quick to land, and no worries. Drop in, tighten it, split, still get here on time. And first thing I noticed was the airplane was having a hard time slowing down. Things right now are definitely out of sequence. I'm hurrying back into the airport. My mind's on the fuel cap and what it costs. If I lose it, then I it all that day. I'm not thinking much about my pre-landing checklist. And you need to have that horn into your headsets. If it's not blaring, you're just not going to hear it. Having a hard time slowing down. And, finally get it down to speed. And gear up landings, buy one where the gear's down and bolted. Got the mains on, and I was just holding it off, just waiting for it to settle in. And as the canard settled a little further than it was supposed to, I realized what was going on here. Terrifying. Actually, not terrifying. It's more of a saddening noise it's making as it's grinding away on the asphalt. The Easy's probably the only airplane in the world where you can gear up and still take off again. So now I'm sort of in shock. And I do that. I take a quick look at the nose, crank the gear down, tighten the fuel cap, take off, get up here, San Ynez, and realize then that 2 out of the 4 through bolts that hold that front gear on have ground off. Now all I have is 2 bolts, and I have to get back to San Ynez, and just thinking about the gear folding up as I landed. It's fortunate that didn't happen. But, if you want to prevent it, you need that horn. It needs to be in your headsets. You need a flashing light. You need something. Flashing light near your airspeed, because that's really what you're concentrating on at that time. That's it.
Down to the shape that we want and get a good, nice contour. We'll add a little bit more foam into this area so we'll get a better transition. But the nose is coming along pretty nicely.
I said, it's better when on downwind not to let your wife talk to you. It leads to gear up incidents.
Well, I've glassed the nose of this airplane now, and I used unidirectional glass. And basically my layout was a 30-degree orientation this way, 30-degree orientation this way, and then a third ply of unidirectional down here. I've also added just a little bit of bid on the nose, just to cover up, because this was an area where the seams were cut here, so that'll help that area. But all in all, it's coming along fine. It's looking pretty good. Looks more like a Lamborghini instead of a Volkswagen. And now it has a nose fitting with the rest of the airplane.
There's a wheel buried in there, all bearings and all.
What kind of wheel?
It's an industrially rated ball bearing job.
Why did you put that in your airplane?
What?
That nose wheel.
It was about 10 years ago. I gear upped in Eugene, Oregon.
What happened?
Got distracted flying through a doggone haze from a grass fire.
You can see I've removed the canard. I've marked out the door. And I've removed the nose here. See? Now the next step is to remove all this foam, keep it an even, a good 7/10 along here. This will all be removed out. My favorite tool for removing the foam is this drill with a wire brush on the end of it. And you can see it's just a laborious process of taking off foam. I've carved away a lot of the excess foam. I liked Ian's idea about the steel plate, so I went ahead and made a steel plate that would fit in there. I'm going to flox that in good and tight, so if he ever does another gear up, he'll have something to glide on and won't dig down so deep into the foam. You can see I've carved out the foam on the top of the lid. I've also put the lip on the door where the door is going to be. I've gone ahead and cut out the door, and then I put it back in place with the little tongue depressors super glued in place. I've done a NACA scoop in preparation for an air inlet in the nose, and I've laid up some fiberglass tubing, and you'll see how I use that in a minute. I have positioned the rudders in position before I glass the inside, just to secure the hard point there to make sure it lines up and there'll be enough room underneath there so this will all fit correctly. So I have the hard point over there set up and ready to go. One of the things I like to do is run the airspeed pitot tube line, and I bury it inside the airplane, and it'll be hooked up later on. There's two lines there. It sort of keeps it out of the way. I'm getting ready to connect the rudders back up to the brakes. You can see I've added a hard point to attach the master cylinder in that area there. The next step would be to put the hinge on the door, a couple of cam locks. I've closed out the back side of the canard where I've added the new material. I'm getting ready to reposition it back on the airplane. And here you can see the front of the canard has been closed out, and it's ready to be remainted back on the airplane and filled and sanded. Last time you saw it, I had just glassed up the lip from the inside. What I had done is I took some duct tape or gray tape and I put it along all around the edge here. As you remember, I had the stir sticks with the tongue depressors super glued on the door here in these places. So when I popped this free, the tape stuck to here and it did not stick to here. Then I trimmed this out. I laid up 3 plies on the lip here. Now I'm in the process of putting the hinge on the door. So I'm going to put this in place, tape it down again so the door doesn't move. Okay. Now I've made these brackets, and they're going to go in here. And I'll flux them into position so they stay. Bolt this down at this end, and I should have my door.
So, gear up landings, nose gear up landings. I had 2 in my airplane over 3,500 hours, and 1 in the ferry airplane. And it's pretty easy, and I'm glad that the propeller moves into the safe position. But it's a good idea to take some precautions and try to avoid this, these kind of incidents. And here are some ways it can happen. It happened to me, and some things we can do to avoid that. The first time I had an alarm system on, but somebody had told me to practice landings, or the way to land are very easy. This was when I was first learning to fly it. I was instructed to fly the approaches power on with the nose high to get the adequate descent rate to get into a small field. And then on multiple go-rounds, eventually the nose gear wasn't extended, and because I was landing power on, the alarm didn't come on either. This is also a very bad way to land that kind of an airplane. But I managed the technique eventually, except that I had a very nice landing on the nose, which was no big deal, but nonetheless shouldn't happen. The second time, the landing gear was, I did not have an alarm system, and the nose gear was partially extended, and I stopped extending it because the airspeed was still too high, and later on failed to extend it all the way. And that of course strips the gear. No problem there, it can be rotated and 180 degrees and then you can fly again. And the third time was in someone else's airplane where the alarm system was not working and too much traffic, helicopters going through the pattern, and just too much activity. And again, because the landing otherwise was very good, there was no substantial damage. But one thing I have noticed that on one of the flights that did have an alarm system, that we need not only a sound alarm but also a visual alarm. And the visual alarm needs to have a flashing rate above 10 hertz. So it needs to flash really fast. If it's a lot of alarm systems that have been advertised and sold have a 1 or 2 hertz flashing frequency, and that is not enough because you're actually monitoring the panel sometimes faster than that when you're primarily looking outside. So high frequency is more alarming, and a high pitch sound is also alarming, but that often depends on somebody's hearing capability. But both, I would recommend both, and high frequency, and using that there should be no reason to ever let this happen.
Okay, I've roughly put the lid back on. I'm getting ready to glass it in, but I wanted to show you the hinges that I have here that I completed last night. And I wanted to do one final look on the inside before we get too into this. You may remember the tube that I laid up. That tube went to this neck, and the neck will provide some air into the cabin area for the pilot and passenger. And there's the block. You can see the block where I've attached the master cylinder on for the left brake. There you can see one of the vents to the cabin area. And there should be another one over there somewhere. Oh, I see, there it is up on top. There's the other vent. I have glassed the lid onto the top of the nose portion. 2 plies of bid on the outside, 1 on the inside. Now I'm filling and sanding. What happened?
Not a word.
What
No
happened?
comment.
What happened? You lost a wheel?
No comment.
Your wheel fell off?
No comment.
There was no left wheel.
No comment.
What do you mean no comment? Come on, you could hardly wait to tell me. Now you won't say a word.
You're going to
No
save
comment.
all kinds of people.
What happened?
That's the purpose of the team.
I learned how to fly very quickly.
Yes. And?
How
What?
to land on one wheel and walk away in one piece.
How did that happen?
Easily.
What'd you do?
Yeah, what happened? Tell us about it. Tell us what happened. The wheel fell off?
It sure did.
How did that happen?
Not only did the wheel fall off, but my nose wheel jammed, so I had no rudder control. So doing a go around without rudder and with a minus left gear makes you think.
I bet you thought quickly.
I thought quickly, kept my cool, did a go around, came in, brought it in very nicely, landed in one wheel, no rudder control, and did just minor ground loop, that's all. The plane is good. The only damage was wiped out nose wheel and left gear. So parts have been ordered, and I'm putting it back together.
Was there a special technique that you used when you brought it down onto that one wheel?
Yeah, keep the left wing high.
With the aileron?
With the ailerons. The ailerons were usable, but the rudder was not. So I kept the left wing high and kept on the wheel as long as I could. And when I dropped speed, she just ground looped into the field.
You got any advice to anybody out there to prevent this from happening
don't
again?
do what I did.
What'd you do?
All right, I lost control coming in. It was turbulent at the end of the runway. I lost control and I landed hard. So instead of completing my landing, I decided to go to a go-around. And then when I was in the air, the radio operator told me I had lost a wheel.
Oh my.
So I said, which wheel? He said, well, looks like it's the left wheel. I said, thanks. It started a crash procedure.
You couldn't see from the cockpit?
I couldn't see.
Do you wish that you had landed that first time and gone through that then, or was it better to?
I think it was better doing a go-around, because if I'd landed the first time, I may have crashed very heavily.
Filling to shoot our first primer. We just got through shooting our primer. And you can see here comes the gear. And we got the gear door on. And I'll show you a close-up of that in a minute when he cranks it back up. Okay, we put a rubber bumper that comes off of a steel belted radio. It's got stainless steel in there. That'll help slow down any more grinding and also help stopping. You can see the gear is retracting back up into its position. And it looks like a nice, clean, tight fit. You can see the NACA scoop there on the right side. That's for the vent that I was showing you, the tube on the other side earlier. Looks like we got a pretty good nose here. The next repair is going to be the gear fairing here. Same on this side. We've got some cracks that need to be repaired in that gear. Well, there she sits with a new nose. We're waiting for some paperwork to be done and completed, and hopefully tomorrow our DAR will come up and take a look at what we've done here and give us a clean bill of health, a new airworthiness, and the owner can fly it away.